Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today to paint some simple carrots. I'm going to be using Winsor&Newton hot pressed watercolor paper. It has just a very fine grain, so it'll work well with our colored pencils that we're going to be using today. And then I'm going to use the Inktense Palette of 24 colors from Derwent. And I'm also going to use the Inktense pencils from Derwent. So you can sharpen these like a regular colored pencil. They are water soluble and they're super vibrant. So they're exactly like the paint pan set except in pencil form. So I'm going to start by mapping out my composition. I'm just going to draw a few carrots. I like to use the length of my hand from my pinky to my thumb. It just kind of helps me map out my page. And then you're just going to start drawing out your carrot. I choose to use this subject because it's such an organic shape. You really don't have to look at an image in order to draw a carrot. Just do whatever feels right. I like to use subjects like this whenever I try out some new watercolor products. So specifically today, I really want to experiment with the Inktense pencils, and rather than just doing some swatches, I'm choosing to do some organic shapes. Also, carrots can be found in such pretty colors. So again, it's just a fun subject for experimenting with a new product, and the Inktense products are so bright and vibrant that choosing something such as this is just an interesting way to explore the color options. So here's just a really quick overview of how I drew out my carrots on my page. Again, don't get too caught up in this stage of it. Just sketch whatever feels good to you and get something down on your page. So I'm going to begin with the wet on wet technique, and I'm just going to use my traditional natural watercolor brushes with the Derwent Inktense Paint Pan set. So with wet on wet technique, you're first going to lay down just clear water. And I'm going to start with my shadows. So I'm just going to put some clear water right along the right side of my carrot here. And then you're going to add in the blue pigment. I'm using blue for my shadowing. So I'm just going to add that in, and you'll see how it fills in the area where I've already applied the water. And I'm just going to keep adding this shadowing. If you have a little bit of blue on your brush, that's okay. I'm going to add shadowing up around where I have my little carrot stem. Then I'm going to use my brush that has a finer tip on it just to add in some more of that blue right along the edge. So I'm just adding a bit of definition to my shadow here. Feel free to add as much or as little as you want. You can leave your shadows very organic in shape and kind of loose, or you can do what I'm doing, which is continuing to layer in some of those darker blue hues to really get some definition. So now you'll see how I just quickly do this along the edges of all of my carrots, and this is going to create a really good base foundation for your composition. So my first carrot over here on the left is all going to be purple, and I'm going to use my violet. And again, I'm going to do the wet on wet technique. So I'm going to apply some clear water, and I want to leave the highlights of my carrot completely dry so that the pigment doesn't run into those areas. So once I add the pigment here, you'll see the highlighted part of the carrot that I've left dry. So I'm just going to fill this in with water. I'm going to use my other brush here with the finer tip to get into the smaller areas, more detailed parts. And then once I've got that all wet, I'm going to get some violet and just let that bleed in to those areas. You don't want to overdo this, you just want to add some pigment, let it bleed out, and then we're going to move on to the next step. So now I'm going to bring in one of my Inktense pencils. I'm using dusky purple, and I have a pretty sharp tip, and while my carrot is still wet, so there's water on my page, I'm going to start just coloring in those areas right along the edge of my carrot. This is adding a really dark edge for me, and as you use these pencils, you'll find that they kind of stay exactly where you put them, even if your paper is wet. So the pigment isn't going to bleed out. It's an easy way to control your details and really get in and add some very sharp lines. And now with red violet, I'm going to add some more, like just slightly warmer hues to my carrot. And I'm going to add those horizontal texture lines that you see on carrots. So I'm just going to pull some of that pigment over using the tip of my pencil, and I'm adding more pigment as well. And as you do this, you can experiment with using the Inktense pencil on the dry parts of your paper as well as on the wet parts. So now I'm just going to grab my brush with a little bit of water on it, and I'm going to blend my colors together. You don't want to do this too much. You don't want everything to blend together. You want to maintain your highlights, but you can add a bit more texture. You can get some nice layers there, and then do a little bit and then leave it alone. So finally, I'm going to use dark purple to add in my darkest shadowing. And I'm just going to apply some of this. My paper is pretty dry at this point, so after adding this detail wherever I want it, I'm going to apply some water to blend my colors together again. I'm just going to continue adding a bit of texture to my carrot here. So now you can practice all of those steps again on one of your other carrots. And I recommend trying some different techniques. Perhaps try to use the pencils on dry paper and then add your water, and then at another point add the pencil to a wet area, and just see how different it turns out. Now moving on to our yellow carrot. So I'm going to do this guy and this guy, and I'm going to start out with just applying the wet on wet technique with my yellow from my paint pan palette. So I'm just adding some water here. Again, I want to leave the parts of my carrot that are going to remain white and highlighted. I want to leave those parts dry. So I'm just adding clear water to the areas where I want that yellow hue to bleed into. So just continue moving that color around. Again, maintain your highlighted areas, keep those dry, and try not to overdo this. You can keep layering in some of that pigment, but don't get too fussy with it. And now I'm going to use my cadmium yellow pencil to start adding some detail and definition to my carrot, just like we did on our purple ones. Another really cool thing to note about all of the Inktense products, so both the paint pan palette as well as the pencils, is that when they dry they are permanent, so you can layer them and your colors won't muddy. Now before they're dry you can still blend them together, but once that water is applied to even the pencils, then that specific layer will be permanent on your page and you can layer other colors on top of it. And now I'm going to use golden yellow, so I've got a sharp tip on my pencil. I'm going to start adding in some texture, adding some definition, and then in a moment here again I'll use my brush to blend my color and pull some of that texture out to create those horizontal lines going across my carrot. And here I'm going to use that golden yellow and I'm going to apply it to an area of my paper that I just added water to. So I'm using the pencil on a wet part of my paper and you'll feel the difference. The pencil almost feels softer. It just really smoothly goes onto your paper. And now I'm going to use amber to really get some definition onto the edge of my carrot, the darkest part there. Now using one of your purple pencils, you can add even another layer of shadow to that darkest part. Don't add too much, just a little bit, and then come back in with your brush to blend that in a bit. And now just to blend in all my shadows, and blend all my colors together, I'm going to use a little bit of yellow from the paint pan palette. I'm going to add some layers here, continuing to add texture. And then I'm going to continue to add a couple more layers of texture using my pencils. So again, this is my favorite thing about the Inktense products, is that you can continue to layer them. They will get more vibrant, more saturated, and they're just a beautiful product for that. They're really, really fun. Some of the colors are almost like a neon. They're beautiful, and I haven't been able to get such vibrant colors in other traditional watercolor products. And just like with the purple carrot, choose another one and do all of these steps over again to get some really good practice using all of your yellow colors in these palettes. So finally, we're going to paint our orange carrots, these two. And we're going to start out again with the wet on wet technique. We're going to do the same thing that we did with the purple and the yellow carrots. So add your clear water, and then we're going to use the paint pan palette to get a base layer of orange, and then we'll use our different pencils to add texture and detail. I'm going to start out using a pencil color called Sienna Gold. So just add those layers and add that texture and that shadowing. Next, I'm going to use cadmium orange to add some more shadowing and more texture. And then a color called Tangerine is going to give me an even more saturated option to use. Finally, I'm going to use mid vermilion to add my darkest shadowing to my orange carrot. And then once again, you can practice all of those steps a second time on another carrot that you have drawn. So now we're going to finish this painting by adding some really fun green stems. So I'm going to start out using the wet on dry technique. So I'm going to have some water and pigment on my brush, and I'm going to apply that to my dry paper. I'm going to be kind of messy with this because carrot stems do look quite messy. They have a bunch of tiny little leaves on them. They're very organic, so don't be too precise with this. Just kind of start laying down a base layer of color, and then we'll get more detailed with our pencils. I'm going to start adding that detail using my Spring Green Inktense pencil. And now I'm going to use some vivid green to add even some darker details into my wild green stems here. And finally, apple green is going to bring a little bit more intensity to my painting. And you can apply all of those steps to the rest of your wild stems. And then at that point, your carrot illustration should be finished. So there it is, little bunch of carrots. I did use the splatter method to add a little bit of color there at the bottom, and you can experiment with that, but that's it. I hope this was a fun tutorial, and thank you so much for joining me. Have a good time with these Derwent products. Thanks, bye.